My name is Brian Madden, and I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us for today's video. Our topic today, we're going to look at some keys that are important for successfully implementing desktop virtualization. And the way we're going to break this down is I want to first look at sort of four keys, four tips that are important to just keep in mind from a technical standpoint. And then we're going to look at four tips that are important to keep in mind from a business standpoint. So 8 tips. We're going to be quick. We're going to be in and out of here in just a few minutes. So let's sort of roll right into it. The first tip that's important to keep in mind when you want to be successful with your desktop virtualization project is that desktops are not servers. Obviously we know this, right? We know that when we buy desktop computers for users, we buy like a tower and it's got a sound card and graphics card and USB and everything. And when we buy servers, we buy rack mount servers that go live in a data center somewhere. Fine enough. Well, the problem is that when you're talking about desktop virtualization, when people start to think about virtualization in general, they think server virtualization. You think like VMware or Hyper-V or Zen Server or whatever. So people, almost every one of us has been successful with server virtualization in our own environments. Now we say, hey, I want to go do desktop virtualization, thinking, oh, it's the same thing, right? It's both virtualization. But much like a desktop is not a server, desktop virtualization is not the same thing as server virtualization. And the reasons you virtualize servers and the techniques you use to be successful with your server virtualization are not the same techniques and not the same reasons you need to be successful with desktop virtualization. So desktop is much more about the actual Windows environment and the applications and the end users and the use cases. So as you're going through your project, whatever you did to be successful with server virtualization, throw that away. Your desktop virtualization project is a very different project for very different use cases with very different team of people. The next thing that's important to keep into consideration for being successful with your desktop virtualization project is that as you're thinking about this whole concept of the single disk image, it's important to understand what that is and isn't, what it can and cannot do. So the single disk image, this is the idea that you've got one disk image that lots and lots of users share. And the idea is simple. You've got 100 users. Oh, let's manage one disk image for them. All users will share that same disk image. And now when I have Patch Tuesday and stuff like that, I only have one image to update instead of 100. Well, that's all well and good. And there's a lot of technologies and products out there that can technically make that happen. But you have to think about if all your users are sharing the same exact image, how are you going to handle personalization? Are you going to use something like roaming profiles or one of the third-party products? How are you handling applications? Are you able to virtualize all of your applications and stream them into that common image after the user connects? Or do you need to build applications into that base image? What about applications that are not compatible with your streaming products? Do you not use those? Do you deploy them locally? Do you put them in the base? So the single image is something that seems good on paper, and there are a lot of companies who are successfully implementing shared image or single image solutions. But it is important to keep in mind that this isn't something where you just say, oh yes, I want to do that and just check a box. It really requires some thinking to figure out how you can make or whether you can make the single shared image work in your environment. The other thing that's important from a technical standpoint with desktop virtualization is to understand the network requirements. Now, when I say the network requirements, a lot of people immediately think about bandwidth, and they immediately think about things like remote protocols, so the RDP or HDX or RemoteFX, PC over IP, whatever. They think about how much bandwidth do these remote protocols take. And true, it is important to know how much bandwidth is required, but what's also important to remember is if you're talking about remote protocols, you're talking about VDI, right? So you've got your centralized desktops in your data center and your users are connecting remotely. And sure, you are curious about how much bandwidth is consumed or how much what users can do. So maybe you can have single monitors with not multimedia applications over lower bandwidth and dual displays and higher intense graphics over higher bandwidth. Keep in mind, though, that VDI is only one form of desktop virtualization. What if you are running VMs on the client device, either with a Type 1 or a Type 2 hypervisor? What if you're doing disk image streaming directly to your clients? All of those capabilities require bandwidth as well. Of course, in those cases, though, you're using bandwidth to actually move disk images around or to move disk blocks around. So it's important to understand your network requirements not just for remote protocols, which is what everyone thinks about, but also to think even if you choose to use client-based virtual machines or client-based images, you still have, the network still plays a big role in that environment, and it's still important to think about what the network requirements are, even if you're not using only remote computing. Another thing that's important if you want to be successful with desktop virtualization, this kind of ties back to the first point I was making, is it's important to respect the user's uniqueness. So what I mean is, and also looking back at the disk image stuff, you know, with server virtualization, it was easy to sort of, you know, rack them and stack them, as they say, and all the servers are the same and carved out. But with users, you've got different users who need different applications, different personalities. I don't mean like human personalities, but network personalities, what they customize and where they store their data, what applications they need access to. Some users want to work on big devices and small devices. Some are mobile, some are remote and fixed, some are on the LAN, some are on the WAN, and there really isn't sort of a one-size-fits-all solution when it comes to desktop virtualization in terms of your users. So it's important that as you're building your desktop virtualization solution, you understand that users are going to want and need to be able to customize and do different things and meet different use cases. And it's important that you design a solution that can meet all the use cases, and you don't just make an assumption that, oh, all users are the same and just do one big solution that's the same for all the users, because typically that doesn't work. So 4 quick tips on the sort of technical tips to think about. Now let's move on to sort of some like business tips to think about. The first thing that's important if you want to be successful with desktop virtualization from a business standpoint is you need to understand why you're doing desktop virtualization in the first place. You know, are you implementing desktop virtualization because you have application compatibility issues that don't run on your local devices? Are you doing desktop virtualization because you want to save money or because you want to have higher availability? Maybe you have regulatory environment requirements and you don't want any corporate data to actually go outside your firewall. Maybe you want the users to be able to own and manage their own environment. These things are all different. So someone building a desktop virtualization solution to save money is not necessarily going to design it in the same way as someone who wants to increase the overall availability or security of the environment. So be sure going into it that you know why you're doing desktop virtualization, and that'll make sure that your solution actually solves the problems that you want to solve, and you're not just trying to do it because you don't think, you don't know why, you're just doing it because it's cool or whatever. Another thing that's important is to understand that desktop virtualization, it's a new paradigm when it comes to desktops. So a lot of us have developed sort of bad habits when it comes to desktop management over the years, like we let users install their own things, or you know, if one user has a weird problem, we'll reboot or remove and reinstall, or just blow a user away and restart, or reformat, or you know, defrag, whatever it's going to do. These sort of bad habits that have evolved over the years for managing traditional desktops aren't going to work in virtual desktop environments, because we're much more regimented. You know, we're sharing images, or we're deploying central images. We are accessing servers that are with roaming profiles. Whatever we're doing, it's much more formalized in desktop virtualization environments. So it's important that as you're doing your project and you're designing your system and trying to be successful, remember to take into account that you also need to design new and better procedures around your desktop virtualization environment to make sure that these bad habits that everyone among us has developed over the past several years in desktops, we have to make sure that those do not sort of travel or migrate with us into our new virtual desktop environment. Another tip that's important from the sort of the business standpoint, is to understand the hidden costs. So we talk a lot about the total cost of ownership and specifically the capital expenses, like how much it costs to buy the system versus the operational expenses. And that's all well and good, but I want to look at some of the costs that you might not think about, like maybe not being able to get rid of legacy systems. If you have traditional desktops in your environment and you build, for example, a new VDI environment, are you moving your user environment 100% into VDI? If no, does that mean now that you've got users who are using both the new VDI and the old traditional desktops? And if so, does that mean I just doubled my footprint? Now I've got 2 desktops for every user? That's actually like the worst of both worlds, not better. Think about the hidden costs of training for users, the change for users. If you do a VDI system that's not available offline, users maybe can't work from offline scenarios, and maybe there's a hidden cost associated with that. You've got costs, of course. We talked about network and servers and storage and licensing. It's important that as you're doing your project and going through this, that you look at this, you understand the hidden costs in your environment, not just the initial capital expenditures. The final sort of quick tip I want to mention is just take a lookout for, be on the lookout for, I guess I should say, kind of the infighting in control. I mentioned the first slide of the first tip was, hey, watch out for those people who do server virtualization and then try to do desktops. You can't do your desktop virtualization project in the same way you do your server virtualization project. So does that mean the desktop people want to be in charge of it? Maybe, but maybe the server people say, well, these are servers in my data center, so I should be in charge. The networking people say, oh, it's my network, I need to have a say in it. And the security people say, well, it's increasing security, so I need to be involved. And it's important that if you want to be successful with desktop virtualization, you need to be on the lookout for kind of these infighting and these different groups who kind of want to control it and say it's mine, no, it's mine. Or maybe you have the opposite problem. People don't want it and say, no, you take it. No, you take it. So it is important, though, to be successful, to understand what the roles of the various groups in the IT department will be, and then to understand who does what so that you don't have these sort of infighting issues and control issues. If you do, though, follow those 8 tips, those 4 tech tips and 4 business tips, then absolutely, it is very possible to be very successful with desktop virtualization, and you'll end up with a lot of happy users and a lot of happy admins. So with that, good luck with your virtualization project. I'm sure you'll be successful. Keep these tips in mind, and everything will work out very well. Thanks you so much, and appreciate the time you took listening today.